Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time and The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. What can I possibly say about these games that has not been said to death already? Quite frankly, not a lot. The former is recognized for being one of the greatest video games ever made, and the latter is recognized as a game that initially scared many off with its time mechanics, but upon adaptation and revisiting were greeted with one of the most character-rich games ever seen by Zelda fans. Since both of these games are so revolutionary in their own unique ways, it seems only natural to put them side by side and compare them. But that's not only the comparison made upon the sequel's release, but it's the comparison being made to this very day. An age-old argument, which Titan reigns supreme? There is, of course, no simple answer to this question, as both of these games have so much going for them, it's uncommon to see someone hold one over the other by a huge margin. Naturally, I want to throw my hat in the ring and give it a go, as this is an argument I've found to be magnificently split in such a fine line. So without further ado, let's get into The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time versus The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. When you get down to it, these games have many differentiating characteristics, but they do have many things in common as well. Mainly in the graphics department. Graphically, every release of these games stand on very similar ground as they've all been released on the same hardware. Nintendo 64, the GameCube ports, the Wii or Wii U Virtual Console releases, or the 3DS remakes. The only real difference between any of these versions graphically is the need of the expansion pack to run the Nintendo 64 version of Majora's Mask, as the textures and models required extra RAM to utilize without interfering with the game's performance. In terms of control, these games both handle Link with the same physics when regarding normal/child Link. Many moves are shared between games both on horse in combat and in animations. Presentation-wise, these games also share identical art styles and soundtrack styles, and many upgrades are also shared between games, which extends to wallets, quivers, arrows, bomb bags, and heart pieces. However, what these games do best is what they do differently from the other, and we'll begin by breaking down the stories. Ocarina of Time opens with a young Link who lives in the Kokiri Forest along with the Kokiri race, a race of forest-dwelling beings who don't physically grow older. Link, however, is not really a Kokiri. He was brought into the forest by his Hylian mother to avoid the wrath of Ganondorf. Link equips himself with a sword and shield and confronts the mythical leader of the Kokiri, the Great Deku Tree. He tells Link he is to fulfill a quest to restore peace and tranquility to Hyrule and its many biomes and inhabitants. However, just before Link leaves, Saria, Link's friend, gives him the fairy ocarina to remind him of her when he needs to? Okay, what the hell? This also opens up the ability to play magical tunes to help Link do various things he couldn't otherwise do without the ocarina, such as teleport or reveal secrets. Link then travels to Hyrule Castle and meets Princess Zelda, who shares her dream of Ganondorf taking over Hyrule. She mentions that Link and she can only save Hyrule if they obtain all 3 sacred stones to open up the Door of Time and obtain the Master Sword to seal Ganon away for him to escape in the next canonical Zelda game. Whichever one that is. Seriously, what the hell is this Zelda timeline? Link obtains the other 2 sacred stones from Death Mountain and Zora's Domain, only to reach Hyrule Castle to see Zelda and Impa fleeing from Ganondorf. Zelda did manage to throw Link the Ocarina of Time, which is just an all-around better version of the Fairy Ocarina, which I think Link realized because he just kind of throws the Fairy Ocarina away. Wow, what a nice, caring guy. Link then learns the Song of Time, which allows Link to enter the Temple of Time and obtain the Master Sword. But, there's a tiny problem with that. As he is, Link is not even capable of using the sword until he's 7 years older, and Ganondorf has all that time he wants to absolutely wreak havoc on Hyrule. You wake up 7 years later to explore a Hyrule in absolute devastation. The castle town is quite literally dead, only roaming with re-deads. Death Mountain is overrun by a dragon, and Zora's Domain is frozen over. Many characters have passed away, grown older, maybe even changed their roles in society. In order to free Hyrule of this hell, Link is tasked with collecting the 6 magic medallions in order to awaken the 6 sages to seal Ganon in the Sacred Realm for good. While Link goes about his business, he encounters a mysterious figure named Sheik, who helps direct Link to his next destination and helps him learn melodies to fast travel across Hyrule, even though it's not really that fast. The rest of the story then follows in a rather straightforward pattern of obtaining an item to enter a dungeon, having Sheik teach you the melody of the respective province, and completing the dungeon to obtain the medallions, rinse and repeat. Obviously, it's not quite that cookie cutter, but if I went into every individual story beat between each dungeon, we'd be here even longer than we already are, so... Upon receiving all 6 medallions, Link enters Ganon's castle and completes its trials. Link then confronts Ganondorf and takes him down, only to have him take his castle down with him. You then escape with the help of Princess Zelda, and you flee the debris of Ganon's castle. Ganon then emerges from the wreck of pillars piled around him, and I seriously don't have words to describe how great of a climax this is for a final battle. The music gives me actual chills. The setting, the intimidating figure of Ganon's pig form, and the music. Oh my god, the music. But I digress. Link defeats Ganondorf, Hyrule saved, and Link returns to the 7 years prior to continue living his natural childhood and part ways with Navi, for whatever reason. I seriously don't get why, unless Nintendo already knew how annoying she was, but who can really say?
Hey, listen! Hey, 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 look, hey!
This story is by no means a crazy variation from what you'd expect a Zelda game's story to be, but I think we all understand why. They had a lot more to worry about than the story of how a green tunic-wearing fairy boy takes down a big, scary guy. And I mean, even considering that, Ocarina of Time is a lot more linear in structure, which leads to a better told story than a non-linear game, since there isn't so much player choice to cause any ludonarrative dissonance. This game marked the beginning of when Zelda games became a lot more cinematic in their storytelling, as the camera was now a new tool able to be utilized for added emotion, effect, and drama. And I personally enjoy the more cinematic storytelling when it comes to the cutscenes. However, when doing monotonous tasks like talking to this goddamn owl for what feels like the 20th time, it gets kind of annoying, especially when the text crawl in the N64 version is so slow. I mean, seriously, the transition between each button press is either enough to make literally all the text boxes scroll by at once, why did they do that? Or it's like waiting for paint to dry for dialogue that quite frankly doesn't often rise much higher than some characters making some very redundant observation or just complaining about something. Not to say this game was written poorly by any means, but I mean, come on, sometimes you just want to get in the conversation over with. The story makes a very satisfying theme of growth and offers an incredibly satisfying leap from young Link to adult Link. As a kid, you don't end up getting to do a whole lot. Most NPCs tell you to screw off or to do simple chores or tasks they can't be bothered with. But the conclusions to child Link's adventures often end happily. The good guys get their way, which stands in stark contrast to adult Link. As an adult, the world is darker and scarier. The world is depending upon you to make it better. Even the small victories keep that dread or fear of what challenges await you afterward. But you get to do more with your enhanced toolkit, and you manage to triumph over obstacles you wouldn't dare face as Child Link. It's so gratifying to transform from Child Link, who does everything holding somebody else's hand, to Adult Link, who can kill seemingly the strongest evil entity in the world almost single-handedly. But that aside, the story is clear-cut, simple, and easy to grasp. Boy becomes man, good defeats evil, the world is saved. I enjoy what's present, and it works really well as a Zelda story, especially with the more linear progression. Now, Majora's Mask, on the other hand... We open in the Lost Woods, and now matured young Link is found looking for Navi. Yeah, well, at least he liked her. But after Link gets jumped by two fairies, we meet the Skull Kid, who bears Majora's Mask. Skull Kid robs Link of his Ocarina of Time and runs off with Epona, leading Link into the world of Termina. Skull Kid then transforms Link into a Deku Scrub and locks Tattle the Fairy out with Link. They then make a deal to team up and catch Skull Kid. We then meet this peculiar character, the Happy Mask Salesman, a mysterious mask seller who seeks Majora's Mask. He tells Link the doom of which Termina is destined. The moon is to crash into Termina in 72 hours, thanks to Majora's Mask manipulating Skull Kid to use the mask's mysterious and evil powers. The Happy Mask Salesman then informs Link that if he gets his precious item back, he can return himself back into his original state. So he tells you to get familiar with the Clock Town as Link waits to face Skull Kid. You aren't allowed to exit the Clock Town yet, so you mainly get to come to grips with Deku Link's controls, and you get to explore and talk to NPCs for later on. A mere 6 hours before the moon crashes into Termina, Link confronts Skull Kid and snatches back his Ocarina of Time, and he plays the Song of Time to reset back to 72 hours before the moon crashes. In order to stop the moon, Link must awaken the 4 giants in each corner of Termina by completing the dungeon and obtaining the boss masks. Link then sets out to Termina Field to awaken the 4 giants in an attempt to revive Termina from its depressive state. Each of the 5 provinces have their own unique epidemics plaguing the inhabitants. The swamp is poisoned, the mountain is frozen in the springtime, the bay's water is murky and depressed, and the valley is infested with the pure essence of death. Clocktown itself is divided in regards of how to handle the moon situation. Do they stay put and attend the festival, or flee for their lives with their families? Along Link's journey, he gains 3 transformations, which symbolize the souls of the people who he heals. The Deku Butler's son, Darmani the war hero of the Gorons, and Mikau the guitar player of the Zora's band the Indigogos. The transformations take the form of masks. Once you equip a mask, you transform into that character or can trigger a cutscene when wearing a non-transformation mask. These transformations assist Link in reaching places he otherwise couldn't reach, and serve as an awesome way to change up the gameplay. You disguise yourself as different people, and you can manage to gain information from NPCs who won't talk to you as any other form. Upon Link completing all 4 dungeons and obtaining all 4 boss masks, he gains the trust of the Giants, who teach him the Oath to Order, the song that will summon the Giants at the top of the clock tower. Link then confronts Skull Kid during the last 6 hours and summons the Giants using the Oath to Order. The summoned Giants scare the piss out of Skull Kid as they hold the moon just barely out of reach of the tower, which begs the question, why is there not a super tsunami happening right now if the moon and Terminus atmospheres were this close to get... Anyway, I guess I shouldn't be taking Matt Pat's job. As a last minute resort, Majora's Mask ditches the Skull Kid and powers the moon up for one last boost of power. Link then books it up to the moon to challenge it. Link then kills Majora in a slightly less climactic finale. The moon, as well as any possible tidal wave, disappears, and Termina rejoices. The happy mask salesman gets Majora's Mask back to do whatever he wants with it, I guess. Link and Skull Kid get a somber moment of forgiveness, and Skull Kid realizes that true friends forgive each other even if they threaten the lives of hundreds, but that aside, Link rides off into the sunset, and Termina celebrates the destruction of the moon. Now, in terms of story, this game is a lot shorter, but the areas where the story shines the best is in the different side quests and characters affected by the events occurring in whatever area. I'll go further into detail about that in a little bit. But the story is a lot darker than Ocarina of Time. The threat of the ever-looming apocalypse plays a huge role in the tension you feel to want to save Termina, and this game gets creepy. There are ancient tribal powers everywhere, beyond dead soldiers of multiple different kinds. And for the characters who don't freak you out from appearance alone, they're absolutely riddled with depressing stories of all different varieties. This game sure feels a lot more mature than an E-rated Nintendo kid-friendly Zelda game. The story isn't quite as intrusive to the gameplay as it was in Ocarina of Time, since it's really about the mini-stories occurring in each corner of Termina. However, that's not to say it's bad at all. As a matter of fact, I think the story has a lot more originality than Ocarina of Time's story because, despite the non-linearity the game offers, you never lose the feeling. The feeling of the moon being so close to crashing, the feeling of witnessing everybody else die and knowing that it was you who caused it. The moon doesn't let you forget why you're here, and I think for that reason I would give the point to Majora's Mask. Both of these games have relatively good stories, but Majora's Mask edges it out for me. It creates a more unusual story, but it's a unique Zelda story that we haven't seen go to these extremes before or even since. This also plays a lot more with your feelings and emotions with all the complex scenarios being seen by all different kinds of perspectives. And for this reason, I'm going to give the point to Majora's Mask. The 3D Zelda games certainly made interacting with characters a lot more enjoyable. The previous games relied solely on text, which certainly was successfully done, but now that they could throw gestures and some facial expressions into the mix, emotion shows so much better as a result. Character is a strong point in both of these games. It's what makes a Zelda game memorable in many cases. Hell, it makes an absolutely hated game like Skyward Sword memorable because its characters like Groose, Zelda, Link, and Impa are so memorable. The big takeaway from Majora's Mask is that it shamelessly reuses assets from Ocarina of Time, which includes practically every character model. This was intended, as Majora was made by reusing the assets the Ocarina of Time team had in order to avoid building an entire game from the ground up, but it still takes a lot away from the originality of the physical characteristics of these characters. However, Majora's Mask makes these characters feel so much more realized and fledged out than Ocarina of Time even got close to. Majora's Mask's general character and characters makes Ocarina of Time's characters look like a joke by comparison. Once again, not to say Ocarina of Time did this poorly by its own merits, But when comparing to Majora's Mask, it really doesn't hold a candle to it. Characters in Majora's Mask have backstories, arcs, even branching paths for each 3-day cycle. Take the cow abduction in Romani Ranch. The first time you realize you can access the ranch, you show up to see a brainwashed Romani and a petrified Cremia. You're immediately invested not only in what the characters are acting like this for, but it encourages finding the way to access the ranch earlier on another playthrough to witness what happened. You eventually find means of getting there on day 1, and you talk to both of the sisters, and you assist in fending off the ghosts to save their cows with Romani on night 1, and you defend the milk supply on night 2 with Cremia. In both of these events, you get backstories on both of these characters. Romani wishes the adults listen to her, which I think we all understand the feeling of, and you learn how Cremia has to look after her sister and try to keep the feeling of doom out of Romani even though she knows she can't keep it out of herself. But it doesn't even end after the actual side quest. You return on night 3 before the moon crashes. You can see Cremia preparing to give Romani the Chateau de Romani, a sort of alcoholic drink to numb Romani's senses, as Cremia prepares for the end of the world. Jesus Christ. This was also without me mentioning you get an empty bottle and a mask that allows access to the milk bar if you choose to do this side quest. Majora's Mask is filled to the brim with side quests on par with this. Every character has a fixed schedule until you change it, and it makes the characters so incredibly realistic it's unbelievable. You could not have played the game in years, and you could still vividly remember side quests like the Anju and Kaife side quest, or the characters like Romani, Skull Kid, the Deku Princess, Mikau, Lulu, Zappos, the list goes on and on. This is Majora's Mask's best and most defining characteristic, bar none. Ocarina of Time has characters who are unique in design but are fairly one-note and don't hold nearly as much depth as Majora's Mask. But the games were built very differently, and it's natural Ocarina of Time couldn't develop its characters as well as Majora's Mask did. To expect it to be on par with Majora's Mask is quite absurd, honestly. Majora's Mask is built around exploring how each character changes Termina or how you change them. Ocarina of Time doesn't require anywhere near that same repetition. Ocarina of Time is the sort of deal where you help a character maybe once and you might see them again for something later? Maybe. But the few times you do talk to some character, the dialogue is rich and memorable. Darunia, Princess Ruto, Naburu, Impa, and Saria are great examples of this. The biggest reasons they don't stick out as much is you won't see any of these characters say something brand new after you help them the one time they need to be helped, since the characters don't have fixed schedules. However, it's neat to witness how the characters change after 7 years under Ganondorf's rule. Dampé the Gravekeeper passes away, Ingo takes over Malin Ranch after Ganondorf gives it to him, Darunia names his son after you for your legacy and heroism, Zelda disguises herself as Sheik to hide from Ganondorf, list goes on. That's about the extent of the development or arcs, however. This point was kind of over once the word showed up on screen, and while Ocarina of Time certainly has identity and characters to make a great Zelda game, Majora's Mask practically spits in its face on this front. Point goes to Majora's Mask. Zelda has made some incredibly memorable soundtracks for players to enjoy long after the credits roll. Most of the games involve some sort of magical instrument for performing magic abilities. Some of the games are even named after their respective instruments. Both of these games feature some of the most memorable, emotional, amazingly themed tracks in the entire franchise. If I read a list out loud, we'd be here until Christmas, so here are some examples. Pause the video if you'd like to read them all. This is a difficult aspect to explain verbally. As much as I love music and playing music, I'm not well versed at all in what makes a musical composition objectively good or bad, so I can really only explain by stating which game constantly leaves me bobbing my head up and down after a playthrough. Or better yet, a song that's thematically good and just a song I want to listen to outside of the game. And I can say without hesitation, Ocarina of Time leaves me dancing in my seat as I play, while Majora's Mask kind of makes me want to just sink into the couch cushion. Ocarina of Time's music makes me want to stand up and dance to some of these tunes. Lost Woods, Bolero of Fire, Prelude of Light, and the Spirit Temple all had me humming or moving around while playing. Majora's Mask makes me feel a lot of melancholy emotions, sort of grayed out backgrounds, upsetting grieving situations, and it just makes me straight up sad. The songs are moving and very fitting of their themes or environments, but outside of the game, I wouldn't think of these songs and go, oh hell yes, let's listen to some sad shit. What a banger. Again, a very difficult point for me to explain verbally, but at the end of the day, Ocarina of Time's unforgettable pieces are synonymous with the phrase Zelda soundtrack in my book. Majora's got some standouts, but I think overall Majora's more consistently depressed and melancholy tone kind of drags the variety out of many of the tracks. I mean, listen to all of Snowhead. The mountains theme and the dungeon theme are just boring to listen to, but they build atmosphere effectively. Ocarina of Time manages to build atmosphere with catchy music. A very subjective point, but hey, it's my list and you can make your own if you'd like to. But in my list, point goes to Ocarina of Time. We now enter the big category, gameplay. This category will consist of 3 points: exploration, overworld, and dungeons. These points will serve to split up a larger category into distinct segments for the sake of going as in-depth as possible. But first, I feel like we should establish what changed in the control department from 2D to 3D Zelda, because I feel like these changes are definitely prevalent when looking at the design of these two games today. So far we've established that these games handle similarly in the control department, but we should discuss how control changed from 2D to 3D Zelda. Ocarina of Time is a monumental landmark for the Zelda series. Zelda meets 3D? Holy shit! The hills of Hyrule went from sprites to polygons. It was unreal at the time, and people, needless to say, blew up over the idea. Naturally, something had to change once they added a whole other axis into the mix, so Z-targeting was introduced. Tap Z and the camera will either change angles or stay targeted on an enemy to keep track of where they are relative to you. But this shifts the focus of the game from a wide shot of exploring to a zoomed-in battle perspective. This splits 3D Zelda into two parts that don't always blend well together when it comes to pace. In 2D, these two go together like bread and butter. You could easily fight off enemies as you explored, or could do puzzles while you fought. But where in 2D these go together like bread and butter, 3D Zelda's combat and exploration go together like ketchup and milk. Ew. You kind of have to fight off enemies and then you can start to explore. It's not as tedious as I make it sound, but at the end of the day, it does change both of these games. But if you want a really in-depth and much funnier analysis of this design, you already know the video I'm going to link you to. But in regards to control, these games handle the exact same as I said before, but it felt wrong to discuss how they handle these next three categories without mentioning the formula's change upon entering the third dimension. So without further ado, let's begin talking about exploration. Any Zelda game that lacks meaningful exploration or side quests is not a very well-made Zelda game. I think we can all agree on that. The very core essence of Zelda is its exploration, at least in the earliest titles. Now, each game doesn't need a ton of areas to explore necessarily, but exploration is important to a typical experience you can expect out of a Zelda game. This naturally makes this point a very important one. Ocarina of Time, as I've stated before, is a very linear Zelda game with a focused story and a more hand-holding progression, which makes it a lot easier to pick up and play when compared to the exploration-heavy games like Zelda 1 or Breath of the Wild. Anybody can come to grips with Ocarina of Time fairly easily. The game does hold your hand to an extent, but it offers plenty of side quests to keep you busy when you want to take a break from story-related quests. There is a trade sequence for each version of Link, plenty of heart pieces to find throughout Hyrule, 100 potential golden skulltulas, equipment upgrades for completing minigames, a golden scale from the fishing hole, optional Ocarina songs to discover secrets, and I'm sure there are even more that I'm forgetting about. I would say story to side quest ratio is about 60-40 in Ocarina of Time. A bulk of playtime will be dedicated to story and dungeon completion, but it's very satisfying to break up the pace a bit and complete side quests to get Link decked out. Majora's Mask takes a very hands-off approach when it comes to your story objectives. I would say it's opposite of Ocarina of Time's ratio. As I see it, story to side quest is about 30-70. This game is a lot harder for somebody to pick up and play. As a matter of fact, that's the main reason this game had to receive a cultural reawakening before it got appreciated. The game was so hands-off that nobody knew what to do. All they knew was that they had a time limit and it stressed them the hell out. But after enough exploring, people pushed through it, and eventually, the game got so much better. Majora's Mask leaves a lot of choice up to the player, but it doesn't heavily punish you for making mistakes. If a side quest goes awry, you have to retread the same ground, yeah, but you can at least reset time and do it all over again. Side quests are what make this game so amazing. There's a trade sequence of maps between the 5 areas of Termina. There are plenty of heart pieces to find throughout all of Termina. There's a sword upgrade, many character building side quests that are incredibly rewarding to complete, and 24 unique masks found throughout Termina, which can branch into many other side quests. Majora's Mask is recognized so positively because of its side quests, due to them being so emotionally investing, and even physically rewarding. In Ocarina of Time, it's still great to help other characters, but the emotional attachments just aren't there to the same effect. Kind of tying back into the character argument again, Majora's Mask lets you explore a lot more and learn a lot more about the world around you. You're just given a lot more freedom, whereas in Ocarina of Time, you sort of have to find the right time when the game lets you explore. Point goes to Majora's Mask. If you're going to be hauling ass back and forth all over Hyrule and Termina, there'd better be an interesting hub to keep you intrigued. And needless to say, both of these games aren't amazing in this regard. Let's begin with Ocarina of Time. Hyrule Field sucks. Let's not dance around this. We know why this overworld is so ridiculously oversized. To show off the capabilities of the Nintendo 64 and how impressive it was that they could render such a huge world. And that's great. But this is one of the most barren overworlds in any Zelda game, maybe even any game period. Just grass and some walls, trees, pose, and a painfully long walk to wherever you're going. But fret not, there are like 5 holes in the ground that will give you rupees, and only rupees. Not only are the contents the same, but the layout does not change at all. This is a textbook example of how making a big overworld can go poorly if there's not enough content to make that overworld remotely interesting. Thank God you get to fast travel across Hyrule, because whether or not you travel by foot or by horse, it's just a long, tedious travel with nothing visually interesting about it. This wouldn't be so annoying if early on the game didn't make you cross Hyrule Field 3 times between the Great Deku Tree and the Dodongo's Cavern dungeons, when you have 0 faster alternatives than walking backwards. Thankfully, Sheik's fast travel methods make traversing Hyrule a lot quicker, and from there on you can do a side quest in the field, but you don't need to haul ass across this Fallout 3 looking ass overworld. Termina Field isn't fantastic either, but I consider its content to be a lot better when compared to its size. Everything is more concentrated, making it a lot more interesting to travel through, and traveling across it isn't nearly as painful as it is in Ocarina of Time. The areas are closer together, you have faster methods for traveling on foot, and you can still fast travel between owl statues, which there are plenty of. Needless to say, Majora's Mask outdoes Ocarina of Time in this regard. However, it's still just kind of a grassy field, and it really geographically makes 0 sense. And you can still find around 5 holes that thankfully have some differentiating content in most of them. If Ocarina of Time does a few things better than Majora's Mask in this regard, I like the songs you use to warp and how they're different, and I like the theme of Hyrule Field over the Termina Field. Termina Field is by no means bad, but it's just a Zelda theme with some extra touch-ups, I mean, come on. But regardless, that cannot save Ocarina of Time on this front. Point goes to Majora's Mask. Dungeons are frequent breakpoints in the story for some puzzle-solving skills that you'll find in every Zelda game, even Breath of the Wild. Zelda games need some effective dungeons to make the puzzles memorable for the right reasons. For Ocarina of Time, I'm not including the child dungeons as they're rather simplistic and are not very complex in their execution. Ocarina of Time presents some excellent dungeons. Atmosphere is incredible, with the music being incredibly ambient, and it gets you in the zone. Each dungeon you have to search for a map, compass, boss key, and the item in that dungeon, and a varying number of small keys necessary to access the required number of rooms. There are a handful of block-pushing puzzles, but each temple presents unique themed puzzles. The Forest Temple has you chasing after ghosts and paintings, the Fire Temple has you hammering many switches, the Water Temple has you changing the level of water, the Shadow Temple has invisible obstacles requiring the use of the Lens of Truth, and the Spirit Temple uses both Child and Adult Link to explore different areas of the temple, Young Link using his small size, and Adult Link using his strength. Very unique to each other, and I would say they all present solid puzzles all around. Majora's Mask is solid as well. The Woodfall Temple has you unpoisoning the water, Snowfall Temple has you knocking down an entire tower to reach the top of this monstrous tower, the Great Bay Temple has you changing the flow of water, and Stone Tower Temple has you flipping the temple upside down. Now that is awesome. Majora has the Stray Fairies as well, to make exploring the temples more rewarding. and if you turn in all 15 of them to their respective fairies fountain, you'll receive an upgrade. Majora's Mask features very different puzzles and offers a greater and more complex variety. However, Majora's Mask has a very, very boring item obtaining order. Oh neat, a bow and arrow. I'm sure that'll make for some cool puzzles. Oh, okay, fire arrows. That changes some things. I mean, the eyeball just has some ice on it now. I mean, I'm sure they'll change it in the next to ice arrows. Okay, why don't we try something new on the last attempt? Oh my god, why? The items obtained are so boring, but the temples themselves make good use of the different forms Link has at the very least. But the items in Ocarina of Time are exciting to obtain because they actually present puzzles you haven't seen in the past 3 dungeons. For bosses, Ocarina of Time has Phantom Ganon, Volvagia, Morpha, Bongo Bongo, Twinrova, and Ganondorf. Majora's Mask has Odalwa, Goat, Yorg, Twinmold, and Majora. Ocarina of Time presents a better variety of bosses, mainly because you don't use the goddamn bow for every boss. The design of all the bosses in both games are very unique and are equal in that regard, but Ocarina of Time offers more for me. There are more dungeons, more interesting items, and really, really good atmosphere. Majora's Mask is by no means really far behind it, and it's wildly inventive with the execution of its puzzles, and it has more reason to explore every inch of the dungeon, but Ocarina of Time's dungeons are a lot more fun for me, and as a result, the point goes to Ocarina of Time. Now for the final point. Legacy. Both of these games are legendary for many of their own reasons. They've both been praised and rarely scrutinized. What legacy have each of these games left? Majora's Mask was scary to people. Many fled from it because the time limit gave them anxiety while playing it, and that's no fun. Who wants to be anxious when playing a game? But when people eventually got into it, pushed past the time limit, and looked at what the game had to offer, and fell in love with those characters, the side quests and attention to detail in every NPC made the game so remarkable. This game scared many people, including myself. It didn't hesitate to frighten us. It didn't hesitate to make us feel sad, witness the depression of a world known as Termina. They let the game take its own form. They didn't hesitate to take risks, to play with dangerous concepts and execute those dangerous ideas phenomenally. Since then, the game's followers have been trying their best to get the Ocarina of Time side of the fence to see what this game offers, and they swear by its quality. Ocarina of Time was terrifying for Nintendo. Zelda in 3D. The task was unquantifiable at that time. Nintendo had made the leap with Mario quite triumphantly. How would they handle Zelda? They did borrow many story ideas from Link to the Past, but the fact that they managed to pull off a game that turned out like this, it's incredible. The characters, the music, the items, the dungeons, it blew people away. This game has had its sucked by plenty of people, praised in all regards, lauded as one of the greatest video games created, period. Any attempt at challenging the views of the game's fans, needless to say, hasn't been let off very easily. I think it's safe to say this game's legacy remains untouched by even the first Zelda. Its reputation has gone down in history as one of, if not the most praised video game ever. And I mean, without a doubt, this point goes to Ocarina of Time. And the winner is The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. So, there it is, my view on the argument of Ocarina of Time versus Majora's Mask. Wow, this video was a trip. Let me end the video with something I hope most understood throughout the entire video. Any negative that I stated about either of these games was not to put down the fans of either of the games, but to evaluate what these two masterpieces have gotten wrong. They of course aren't perfect. Most games given the title of revolutionary have often had many a cruel aging process or have done better since. But it's not to discredit these games for what they are. They're unforgettable adventures that span across decades of generations of gamers. Games that have gotten us through rough times. Games that have given us a world to explore and enjoy. Games that will be present in our childhoods and our adulthoods. In the end, I find myself favoring Majora's Mask over Ocarina of Time. However, I heavily stress that me liking Majora over Ocarina does not mean I hate Ocarina of Time or anything. As a matter of fact, I still think the game is amazing. It's garnered such a reputation for a reason, and it's such an important game. It's ingrained in the minds of so many childhoods and adulthoods alike. However, Majora's Mask also means a lot to me because it was my first Zelda game. which very well could have influenced my views on Ocarina of Time when I played it afterwards. I adore the characters, the masks, the boss battles, the side quests, and the music so much, and I'm not ashamed to say nostalgia very well could take part in that. However, adoring a game for nostalgia is not wrong, and nobody should feel ashamed for liking something because of a connection to it as a child. However, there is also a big difference between objective quality and praising something because it's something you had when you were a kid. Anyways, I wanted to make this video not to argue for Majora's Mask or argue against Ocarina of Time, but to celebrate how fantastic these cultural phenomenons of video games are, and above all, open up civilized discussion and debate about these two achievements of video games. These are probably among two of the most popular video games ever, and it's incredible how the Zelda series has moved on since then, and it only seems to be getting better with games like Breath of the Wild. I appreciate you guys so much for watching this monstrous video. I put a lot of time into this one, and it was kind of on and off about it. As some of you know, I had some computer issues I had to sort out, which took many months in itself. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Feedback is much appreciated. If you want to get an idea of what video I'm working on next, my Twitter's in the description. Shameless plug, I know. I hope to get another video out before the end of the year, but we'll have to see. I've been Troy the Ninja Toad. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.